Welcome to the Thriving Outside the Box podcast. Join me, Dr. Kimberly Grocher, a licensed psychotherapist, executive coach, and yoga and mindfulness meditation teacher, as I shed light on the stories of leaders and entrepreneurs across industries who not only dared to create their own path in their careers, businesses, and lives, but have found a way to do it while thriving mentally, physically, and spiritually. I hope you walk away with the inspiration to do the same. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Thriving Outside the Box. I'm your host, Dr. Kimberly Grocher. I'm a psychotherapist and executive coach, and your guide to designing a path, whatever that means for you, that actually works for you. I'm so glad you're here. Today's episode is a solo episode, and it maybe has a little different feel than some of my other solo episodes, but I wanted to talk to you about conversations that count. Or before you say a word, how to have conversations that count. So this is based on an Instagram video I did maybe 2 or 3 years ago that then I was asked to do a keynote on for the Business Council of Westchester's Women Council 2 years ago. So I thought it might be nice to include it here because I'm noticing that communication is really a big issue in our relationships, in our communities, in our world, right? And it's a skill that I think people talk about a lot is very important, but I don't think a lot of people actually understand how to communicate. And there are many different tips and tools and I statements and things like that that are floating around and that are taught that definitely have a place. But I wanted to present this from a different perspective for you to consider. So before we get started, I want to ask you to do something. As you listen, I want you to be on the lookout for just one thing you can put into practice in the next 24 hours. So we're not talking about a list. We're not talking about a plan. One thing, note it, that's it. And we'll come back to that at the end. Today, I would like to get personal and practical because here's what I know from years of sitting with people in therapy, in coaching, in classrooms, in retreats, in relationships, both as a participant and as a facilitator or leader. Most communication breakdowns don't actually happen in the conversation. They happen before it and how we prepare or don't. In the story we've already told ourselves before we open our mouths, and the outcome we've already decided on before the other person says a word. We already know what we want. We know what we're expecting to hear. We know what we want to get, and we're leading with that, right? And oftentimes we're not listening. Listening is a lost art, but part of being in conversation is really being able to hear. And I think in a world that's very chaotic, where our nervous systems are functioning out of order, it's very hard to listen and to get back to that place. And it's not often valued and it's not often taught. So today we're talking about the conversation before the conversation. And I'm giving you a framework rooted in both therapeutic practice and real world leadership for having conversations that actually count. So a quick note before we dive in. Again, like I said, this approach is a little different from a lot of communication advice. We're not starting with scripts or formulas. Today, we're going deeper because how you show up in a conversation goes beyond your words. It's about how you connect, and that starts from the inside out. So the first thing I want you to consider is preparing. If you have a conversation that needs to be had in mind, whether it's at work, whether it's with a loved one or a colleague or a friend, let's start with how you prepare. And I mean real preparation. Not rehearsing what you're going to say, which happens a lot of time if you struggle with anxiety, whether chronically or in this particular situation. But I mean getting clear on what's actually going on before you say anything at all. The first thing I want to invite you to do is to identify the real issue, not the symptom, the issue. Here's an example. So let's say you're frustrated that a certain person doesn't respond to your emails and what you think is a timely manner, right? Maybe you think that their responses back to you is delayed, is not in an appropriate time frame, right? But what is the real issue? So the symptom is you're not responding to my emails. You're not getting back to me in this time frame that I expect. But the real issue might be I'm unsure of where me or my work or my message or my needs falls in your priorities. I don't know if my contributions are valued in this setting, whether that's work or relationships. And that's a very different conversation. You can go in talking about these emails, but if the real issue is that I don't think what I bring to the table is being valued or prioritized, then you're still not going to have the conversation you need to have, right? And so the emails may start to come in a little sooner, they may not, right? But you're still left thinking about does my contribution matter? Am I a priority? Next, you want to think about your outcome. So, again, being very honest with yourself. What do you actually want to happen as a result of this conversation? And how are you going to cope if that outcome doesn't happen? This is the truth. You cannot control the other person's response. And I find that a lot of times we get caught up on finding the perfect words, the perfect scenario, and it's kind of like, what are those magic buttons, words, whatever that I need to say or press to get what I want out of this conversation? And that's a setup for you, and that's a setup for the other person in the conversation. You can only control how you show up. You can only control what you communicate. Knowing your outcome and your coping plan means you walk in grounded and not communicating from a place of desperation. So ask yourself, is this a conversation that's about processing, about exploring something together? Is there something that actually needs to change? Or do I just need to be heard? This answer helps you decide how you enter the conversation. Third, before you enter. So put yourself in the other person's shoes for a moment. Do they even know there's an issue that you want to talk about? How might they be seeing the situation? What's their experience of it? And also be honest with yourself about the power dynamics at play, because that really does matter in communication as well. Are you talking to a boss, a peer, someone who reports to you? Are you talking to your partner? Are you talking to a childhood friend? Are you talking to your parent? Right? The context matters and it shapes how you frame what you're bringing up. And finally, schedule the conversation. This sounds very simple, but it actually is very profound. You don't want to be having important conversations when you're rushed, when you're depleted, when you're caught off guard. Give yourself and the other person the gift of being present as much as you can. Sometimes we can't plan, right? It's a type of situation or conversation that maybe can't necessarily be planned. But in the cases when it can be, really thinking about a time where both of you, or if there's more of you, right? If it's a group, a family, a team, thinking about when all of you can be present. Devices off, notification silenced, really being present. So for this second part, we're moving into the actual conversation. This goes back to being present, right? Being fully present and being aware of the energy you're bringing. How are you showing up right now? Are you hungry? Are you tired? Are you lonely? Are you angry? Are you frustrated from something else entirely, right? Or are you calm? Are you neutral? Are you in a pretty grounded or present place as much as possible? The energy that you walk in with sets the tone before you say a single word. People may not always have the words for other people's energy, but you feel it and you pick up on it and you respond to that. So even before you open your mouth, you're bringing a certain energy. And can you be aware of what that is? If you need a moment to ground yourself first, take it. And I'll talk to you in a few moments about how to actually do that if that's not something you're aware of or that you have a practice for. So, and it's also a great tool that even when you can't fully prepare, it's something that you can activate in the moment. Next, Be clear about your concern, about your purpose, about what you're open to. Clarity is such a gift to the other person. It tells them that you've done the work, you've thought this through, you have a certain level of confidence about what you're bringing to the conversation, maybe what you need from the conversation. It signals that you're not there to dump or attack, you're there to connect, which is very important. And oftentimes, when it's clear that you're there to connect and not to attack or not to dump, the other person doesn't have to put their armor on, right? Because when they put their armor on, you're not going to be heard either. Third, and this is the one I want to spend the most time on, and I mentioned it earlier, listen. Give space and time for the other person to talk. And when they do, actually hear them. I can't tell you how many conversations I've seen, whether it's been in a couples therapy session or it's been on a street corner, where I witness two people talking and both people are talking at the same time and they're cutting each other off, right? And it doesn't even have to be like a conflict situation, right? But there's no space for the other person to talk and for someone else to listen, right? It's a lot of talk, a lot of talk. Nobody's listening. You're cutting each other off. You're going over each other. And I'm always curious when it's not like a session, like what is that actually accomplishing? Like, did you actually feel heard? Did you actually get what you needed out of the conversation? Did it actually make sense? Is this something that's going to come up later and somebody says, I told you, and you're like, no, you didn't. No, maybe they did tell you, but you just weren't listening because you were so busy talking. But anyway, so again, thinking about giving space and time for the other person to talk and actually listening, demonstrating empathy. And I think this piece about empathy is really important, no matter what certain groups say these days about empathy. But anyway, um, empathy is important because it's a form of acknowledgement. The most important and powerful thing you can do in any conversation is make the other person feel seen, heard, and understood. And that doesn't mean that you agree with them. It doesn't mean that your concerns, your points are not valid and don't deserve to be heard as well. It's simply saying, I heard you. This is what you're saying. I'm acknowledging this. I'm acknowledging that this is a concern for you, or I'm acknowledging that this is something you feel like needs to be brought to my attention. Again, not that the conversation is always about an issue. So I want to pause here and I want to invite you to try something. I'm going to guide you through a short reflection. And if you're driving, you can keep your eyes on the road and just let the question sit with you. If you're not driving and you're in a setting where you can take a seat or find another comfortable position to take a breath and just give this visualization exercise a try. So I want you to start with taking a nice deep breath in and letting it go. Take another nice deep breath in and let that one go. Take one more nice deep breath in and let that go. Now I want you to think back to a time, it could be recent or it could be years ago, when you felt truly heard and understood in a conversation. Not just tolerated, not just listened to or accommodated on the surface, but like really, truly heard. What was that experience like? What did the other person do or not do that made you feel that way? What was happening in your body that let you know you felt heard, you felt seen? And what did that feel like to be seen, to be heard? Now, what would it mean if you were to offer that to someone else? In your next conversation, in your next team meeting, in your next difficult exchange with your partner or a loved one or a family member? What would it mean if you could offer that to them? What would it mean if you could demonstrate that for them? Take another nice deep breath and come back. All right, so hopefully you were able to practice that visualization or at least play with it. And so that feeling, if you were able to do it, that feeling that you were able to connect with, that's what's possible in every conversation when we choose to truly listen. And that leads to this other thing. I mentioned it a few minutes ago, but really seriously, it's avoiding what, we know is dumping. You've been holding something for so long that the moment someone opens the door, everything comes flooding out. Right. And I want to be clear there are certain spaces where that is appropriate. So, like, therapy is definitely one of those places, right? Where you don't have to prepare, right? But that's a very different type of relationship. That's a very one sided relationship, right? And we're talking about situations where ideally it's a reciprocal relationship. So, in those places, clarity, space, and listening are your protection against the dump. And also reminding yourself that you can't control the other person's response. You can only control how you show up. And then finally, there's after the conversation. And this is the part that most of us skip, right? The conversation's over, it's done, we had it, right? But it's also the part that determines how you grow from this experience or just survive it. So maybe taking a few moments to pause and reflect afterwards, not ruminate on it, not, go back into what happened obsessively, but asking yourself some honest questions. What went well? Where did I struggle? What did I learn about myself and about the person that I was speaking to, about their perspective, right? And what's in my control to do differently or maybe the same next time, right? If it worked, what's in my control to do and what is not in my control at all? If the conversation was particularly charged or activating or difficult, this might be a good time to debrief with your therapist, a coach, a mentor, or somebody else that you trust. And really focusing on processing with intention, not just gossiping, not just venting indefinitely, right? But how can I reflect and move forward? And then if action was agreed upon in the conversation, follow through, right? Or communicate honestly if challenges arise. Accountability after the conversation is also part of the conversation. So I do want to just reflect on a couple of nuances. I want to share a couple of nuances. And so you might be thinking, that sounds really nice, but what do I do when I don't have time to prepare? Right? What if somebody catches me off guard in the hallway and starts dumping on me, right? Or I'm put on the spot in a session or a meeting. Totally get it. And that's where the grounding and the breath work become your best friends. Very serious. We talk a lot about grounding and mindfulness and things like that. And these things aren't just things you do on a cushion. Like, these are things that you actually practice in life, right? So, being able to take a slow, intentional breath before you respond, taking a moment to feel where your feet are planted to the support beneath you. If you're sitting in a chair, noticing the support of the seat beneath you, noticing those places where maybe you're holding some tension. And if you're able to, in those few moments, giving yourself permission to let them release or soften a bit. So if you notice that you're hunched over, maybe opening your chest and bringing your shoulders back, maybe lengthening up through your spine, maybe thinking about taking an open embodied power position that's not intimidating, but more so helping you to be grounded and clear and in a place where you can physically, emotionally, and mentally be decisive about what comes next for you. Practice this in low stakes conversations so it's available to you when the stakes are high. And that's where practice comes in, right? When you're in the midst of something that's a crisis or a huge challenge, and this is not part of your practice or this is not something that you do with any type of consistency, it can be really hard to access. However, when you practice in situations that are a little more comfortable, that it doesn't feel like so much is on the line, it's a great way for you to have that body memory, that muscle memory, that mental memory of how you want to be when you show up in these conversations that are high stakes. So, related to empathy is the second nuance, which is acknowledgement. I want to clarify there's a difference between acknowledgement and apology. Acknowledgement is hearing, seeing, understanding the other person. You can acknowledge someone's experience without agreeing with it or apologizing for it. If you are apologizing, using an apology when it's genuine and you know what you're apologizing for. Apologizing can be very manipulative. You know, those conversations where somebody says, well, I'm sorry you feel that way. You know, well, I'm sorry that didn't go that way. I'm very sorry, and the energy, everything. They're not sorry. It's not an apology. It's not real. And actually, a lot of times that makes things worse, right? A real apology is not weakness, it's clarity. It's recognizing, it's taking accountability for, like, oh, wow, I see where that went wrong, or I see how that could hurt you. And I'm sorry that was, what happened. That wasn't the intention. Again, apologizing when you're sincere and it's warranted. There's also the apologizing that some people do where it's more of I want this to go away, right? And it's kind of taking responsibility or ownership for something that's not yours. And so being aware of that too. But again, acknowledgement and apology are different. You can acknowledge something, you can acknowledge someone without it being an apology. And finally, written communication. So, we live in a world of email, text, Slack, direct messages, like so many things, so many things. And all of these benefit from the same principles. So before you send somebody a message, get clear on your purpose. Review what you send, right? Before you send it, especially if you know you're writing from a place that you're very emotional. Ask yourself if this message became public, if it ended up in front of a board or in the news, would I feel good about the tone, the language, or the message? If the answer is no, rewrite it. In certain professional situations that I'm in, I always think about that. If this were to be shared with somebody else, with the public, with a board, with whatever, and they said, this is what Dr. Kim said, right? This is her email. What do I want to convey? And sometimes, it's not warm and fuzzy and friendly, like maybe how people think coaches or therapists or professors should be, right? But what you can't say is that it's rude. You can't say that it's off topic, right? So is it always about the warm and fuzzy? No, and it doesn't have to be. But understanding that warm and fuzzy doesn't always mean rude, confrontational, nasty, and vice versa. It's possible to communicate clearly through written messages that are appropriate to the context and the setting. Again, review before you send, especially if you're coming from an emotional place. There's a way to be real and honest and use discernment about your words. And sometimes, and I think this is really important, and maybe one day when I speak about this again, I might lead with this, but sometimes the most powerful communication choice is to recognize that having a conversation is not the answer right now. Maybe it's not appropriate to have these conversations. Some situations need time, space, or a different kind of support entirely. And it's okay to know that. Some conversations, some communication doesn't need to happen at all. And it's okay to discern that and decide that. All right. So as we bring this to a close, remember when we started that one thing I asked you to do was to be on the lookout for something that you could practice or bring into your next 24 hours. So I hope something surfaced for you today. Maybe it's scheduling a conversation that you've been avoiding. Maybe it's taking a breath before your next difficult exchange. Maybe it's getting real and honest with yourself about what the real issue is before you walk into a conversation. Whatever it is, write it down and give it a try in the next 24 hours. So, just to wrap up what we covered today. So, we talked about preparing for conversation. We talked about how to show up when it's time for the conversation. And we also talked about reflecting, debriefing, and follow through after the conversation. And we gave some attention to those nuances of, grounding and breathing and kind of taking care of yourself so that you can be present for the conversation, especially when you're not able to prep. It's not something that you can do beforehand. We talked about acknowledging without it being a performance, the difference between acknowledgement and apology, and also writing with intention, written communication with attention. So, yes, these are communication skills, but these are also relational skills. As I was sharing them with you, I was thinking a lot about couples therapy. I've been teaching a course on couples therapy at Columbia to second year MSW students, right? And so a lot of what we are talking about and they're learning about is communication and partnerships. So they're relational skills. They're skills that you can use with your loved ones. They're leadership skills, right? A good, strong, effective leader has good communication skills, and they're always working on them and developing them and enhancing them. It's really important as you are navigating whatever this path is in your life. At some point, you're interacting with other people and you need to communicate, and being able to do so effectively is priceless. And at the core, it's about showing up as your whole intentional self in the moments that matter most. If this episode resonated with you, please stay connected. You can follow me on Instagram at Dr. Kim B. Grocher. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can share this episode with anybody you think needs to hear it or would benefit. And if you haven't already, please subscribe so that you are on top of when these episodes are dropping. So until the next time, keep thriving, and I'll see you soon.